There was a time when switching away from Windows felt almost unthinkable. For decades, Microsoft Windows dominated personal computing so completely that the idea of abandoning it seemed unrealistic for most users. From schools to corporations, from gaming rigs to office desktops, Windows was the default. It wasn't just an operating system, it was the operating system. And at the center of that empire stood Bill Gates, the co-founder of Microsoft, a symbol of the personal computing revolution. But something unexpected has been happening in recent years. Quietly at first, then more visibly, users across the world have begun walking away. Not to another commercial operating system, or not to a new proprietary platform, but to Linux. This shift hasn't happened overnight. It has been building slowly, shaped by frustration, curiosity, economics, privacy concerns, hardware limitations, and a growing awareness that computing does not have to be controlled by a single corporation. Many longtime Windows users are discovering that Linux is no longer the intimidating command-line system they once feared. It has matured. It has become accessible. And for many, it now represents freedom. For years, Windows updates have been a point of irritation. Forced restarts, long update times, unexpected changes to settings, new features nobody asked for, telemetry running in the background. System resources consumed by processes users never intentionally enabled. Its hardware requirements increased, especially with newer versions of Windows. Older but perfectly functional machines were left behind. When Windows 11 introduced strict hardware requirements like TPM 2.0 and newer CPU generations, millions of PCs were suddenly deemed unsupported. These were machines that still worked perfectly fine. For users who didn't want to buy new hardware simply to keep using their computers safely, Linux became an attractive alternative. Linux distributions stepped into that gap with remarkable flexibility. Lightweight environments allowed aging laptops and desktops to feel fast again. Systems that struggled under Windows suddenly felt responsive and efficient. People who had nearly given up on their hardware found new life in it. And when they realized that Linux was free, open source, and community-driven, many began asking a deeper question. Why wasn't I told this was an option before? Privacy has played a major role in this migration. Over the years, concerns about data collection have grown. Windows integrates cloud services, telemetry systems, targeted suggestions, advertising components, and deeper ties to Microsoft accounts. While many of these features are marketed as conveniences, some users see them as intrusive. Linux, by contrast, typically runs without built-in data harvesting. Most distributions do not require online accounts. They do not track user behavior. They do not push ads into the start menu. For privacy-conscious individuals, developers, journalists, activists, and everyday users tired of being monitored, this difference is powerful. Then there is control. Windows increasingly feels like a managed experience rather than a user-controlled system. Certain settings are locked down. Updates cannot always be postponed indefinitely. Some components cannot be removed without workarounds. Linux flips that relationship. On Linux, the user is the administrator. The system can be customized deeply. Desktop environments can be swapped. Package managers give granular control over software. Even the kernel can be configured. That level of empowerment attracts not just developers, but anyone who wants their computer to behave exactly how they choose. The rise of beginner-friendly distributions has made the transition easier than ever. Operating systems like Linux Mint, Ubuntu, Zorin OS, and Pop!_OS offer polished desktop experiences that feel familiar to former Windows users. Installation processes have been simplified dramatically. Driver support has improved. Software centers make installing applications straightforward. For someone switching for the first time, the learning curve is far less steep than it once was. Gaming, long considered a major barrier to Linux adoption, has undergone a transformation. Thanks to advancements like Proton compatibility layers and Steam Deck development, thousands of Windows games now run smoothly on Linux. Valve's investment in Linux gaming shifted perceptions dramatically. Suddenly, Linux was not just for servers or developers, it was capable of handling AAA titles. For gamers frustrated with Windows updates interfering with gameplay or system performance issues, Linux became viable. Developers have also driven the migration. Many modern development tools are built with Linux compatibility in mind. Web development, containerization, DevOps workflows, and cloud-native technologies often integrate more seamlessly with Linux environments. Tools like Docker, Kubernetes, and various open-source frameworks were designed around Linux infrastructure. While Windows has improved its support through features like WSL, some developers prefer working directly in a native Linux environment without layers of abstraction. Corporate trends have influenced individuals as well. Many enterprise servers run Linux. Cloud infrastructure heavily relies on Linux distributions. When IT professionals and developers work daily with Linux in professional environments, they become more comfortable using it at home. Over time, the distinction between server OS and desktop OS begins to fade. Education has played a role too. Computer science programs frequently introduce students to Linux early in their studies. Universities encourage open-source exploration. Students learn scripting, shell commands, and package management. For younger generations entering the workforce, Linux does not feel foreign. It feels foundational. Meanwhile, subscription fatigue has shaped user attitudes. As more services move to recurring payment models, some users resist ecosystems that feel increasingly monetized. While Windows itself is typically a one-time license bundled with hardware, its ecosystem integrates with paid cloud storage, productivity subscriptions, and enterprise services. Linux, being open source, aligns with a philosophy that resists lock-in. The psychological factor of independence cannot be underestimated. There is a certain satisfaction in using software built by global communities rather than controlled by corporate boards. Open-source contributions feel participatory. Bugs can be reported and often addressed transparently. Roadmaps are discussed publicly. For many users, this transparency builds trust. Of course, the migration is not universal. Windows remains dominant in many sectors. Enterprise environments depend on specific proprietary software. Certain creative tools, industry-standard programs, and specialized business applications remain Windows exclusive. Compatibility challenges still exist. Some hardware manufacturers provide better driver support for Windows. For many users, especially those who rely on specific applications, switching may not be practical. Yet the conversation has changed. Linux is no longer a niche curiosity. It is increasingly viewed as a legitimate alternative for everyday computing. Online forums, YouTube channels, and tech communities regularly discuss migration experiences. Tutorials guide users through dual boot setups. Success stories circulate widely. Social media has amplified these narratives. When users share screenshots of revitalized old laptops running smoothly on Linux, others take notice. When they describe removing bloatware, speeding up boot times, or reclaiming system resources, curiosity spreads. Word of mouth remains powerful. Another factor is system performance stability. Linux systems are often praised for uptime and efficiency. They can run for extended periods without mandatory restarts. For professionals who rely on uninterrupted workflows, that stability matters. Security perceptions also influence decisions. While no operating system is immune to vulnerabilities, Linux benefits from open-source scrutiny. Security patches are often distributed quickly. The permission model and package management systems can reduce exposure to certain threats. Some users feel safer on Linux, particularly those concerned about malware targeting Windows platforms. Customization culture drives enthusiasm. Desktop themes, tiling window managers, scripting automations, and workflow personalization create a sense of ownership. Windows allows customization, but Linux encourages it at a deeper structural level. The hardware reuse movement intersects with Linux adoption. As environmental concerns grow, extending the life of devices becomes socially meaningful. Installing a lightweight Linux distribution instead of discarding a machine aligns with sustainability values. Even corporate narratives have evolved. Microsoft itself has embraced aspects of open source, contributing to Linux projects and integrating Linux into its cloud services. The irony is notable. A company that once viewed Linux as competition now collaborates within the open source ecosystem. This shift reflects broader industry changes. For Bill Gates, who stepped back from daily Microsoft leadership years ago, the optics of users abandoning Windows might symbolize a generational transition. The computing world he helped shape is transforming. Cloud computing, mobile devices, web apps, and decentralized development models redefine what an operating system means. Modern workflows rely heavily on browsers and cloud-based tools. When applications run inside web environments, the underlying OS becomes less central. If users spend most of their time in a browser, switching operating systems becomes less disruptive. The pandemic-era surge in remote work also reshaped computing priorities. People evaluated their systems more critically. Performance, privacy, and cost became immediate concerns. Linux offered solutions to some of those pressures. Community support networks have matured. Online guides, forums, documentation, wikis, and video tutorials make troubleshooting easier than ever. The sense of isolation that once deterred new users has diminished. There is also an ideological component. Some view Linux adoption as a statement about digital rights. They advocate for user sovereignty, open standards, and resistance to monopolistic control. However, transitions require patience. New users must adjust to different software availability, file system structures, and command line interactions. Some initially return to Windows after encountering obstacles. Migration is not frictionless. Dual booting has become a bridge strategy. Users keep Windows for specific applications while exploring Linux gradually. Over time, some discover they rarely boot back into Windows. Small businesses have begun experimenting as well. Lower licensing costs and flexible deployment appeal to startups. Technical teams comfortable with Linux find it efficient for internal operations. Creative professionals represent a mixed case. While open-source creative tools exist, certain industry standards remain Windows or Mac OS-centric. Adoption varies by field. Gaming improvements continue accelerating. With each compatibility update, confidence grows. When major titles launch with Linux support or run seamlessly through translation layers, perception shifts. Hardware vendors are slowly recognizing demand. Some now ship laptops with Linux pre-installed. This reduces friction for newcomers and signals legitimacy. The broader open-source movement benefits from momentum. Contributions increase. Documentation improves. Innovation accelerates. Windows continues evolving too. Performance optimizations, interface refinements, and integration improvements address criticisms. Competition fosters improvement across ecosystems. Ultimately, the narrative is not simply about abandonment. It is about diversification. Users are exploring alternatives more confidently than before. Operating system loyalty is no longer automatic. Technology landscapes are cyclical. Dominance shifts. Preferences evolve. The rise of Linux on desktops reflects broader cultural changes in how people view ownership, privacy, and control in digital spaces. For some, switching to Linux feels revolutionary. For others, it is practical. For many, it begins with curiosity and ends with empowerment. Whether this trend will dramatically reshape market share remains uncertain. The psychological shift is undeniable. Linux is no longer seen as fringe. It is part of mainstream conversation. The story is not about shock alone. It is about transformation. It is about users discovering that choice exists. And as more individuals experiment, learn, and share experiences, that awareness continues spreading. The computing world is larger than any single corporation. It always has been. And now, more users are realizing it.